Imagine you inherit a ship. It's old, creaking, but legendary. It once carried a hero named Theseus, home from his greatest victory, and for centuries it's been preserved as a national treasure. But wood rots, planks crack. So, one by one, caretakers replace the damaged pieces. A new plank here, a new mast there. Years pass, decades. Eventually, every original part has been replaced. Is it still the same ship at that point? This is the ship of Theseus, one of philosophy's oldest and most unsettling thought experiments. On the surface, it's about a boat. But beneath that, it's about identity. What makes something what it is? Is it the material it's made from, the shape it holds, the function it serves, or the story we tell about it? And then the problem deepens. Suppose someone gathers all the discarded original planks and rebuilds them into a ship. Now there are two vessels, one that has existed continuously through repairs, and one made of the original parts. Which one, if either, is the real ship of Theseus? This paradox doesn't just challenge how we think about objects, it quietly turns the camera on us. Our cells regenerate, our beliefs change, our memories fade, shift, or disappear. Yet we insist we are the same person we were years ago. So, when does change become a replacement? And at what point does something stop being itself? That question is why this ancient ship still sails, straight into debates about identity, technology, and what it means to persist over time. And it's a beautiful analogy about my thoughts about Phantasy Star Online 2 New Genesis. PSO2 New Genesis is an online RPG created by SEGA of Japan and distributed globally. If you followed the Japanese community around the launch of the game, you might have stumbled upon a tagline people were often using when referring to the game. Even if the world changes, I'm still me. The official translation of that line got completely butchered, but that's besides the point. This tagline refers to the player character, who finds themselves in a new world 1,000 years in the future, but it can also be interpreted in a different way. Even if the playable world changes, I'm still the same game. Despite everything about New Genesis being different on a technical level, having a new graphics engine, new programming staff, new assets, new story, new gameplay systems, at its core it's still the same game. We fight enemies in areas vaguely resembling the old planets, defeat dark fowls, collect loot, pick up stones online, enhance our stats, and AFK all day in the lobby, waiting for an urgent quest to spawn. Many systems have direct counterparts to systems from PSO2, and in pretty much all cases they're executed better. In theory, this ship should be able to sail far better than this old rusty one, but it hasn't reached the same heights as the old one did. The beautiful thing about the ship of Theseus thought experiment is that there is no correct answer. We as humans know we're the same person as we were yesterday, despite many of our cells regenerating on a daily basis, because we have a sense of self. An object, or in this case video game, doesn't have that, so it completely relies on us to assign it an identity. The most obvious aspect of a game to center its identity around is the story mode. In PSO2, story operated on a quantity over quality mantra, so we had a ton of cutscenes to go through, but they didn't always look very good.
いっそのこと氷が生徒会長になっちゃえばいいじゃない。私、そういうの向いてないし、ひつぎちゃんがなるべきだよ。生徒会のみんなもそうなるって思ってるし。
On the flip side, New Genesis cutscenes are gorgeous to look at, but the quantity is extremely lacking.
Ooh, that's kind of small.
Part of the reason is that story became mandatory, as opposed to PSO2, so the devs didn't want to bombard the player with hundreds of hours of story content they'd have to churn through before actually playing the game, something Final Fantasy XIV is very guilty of. However, I think even with that context in mind, the quantity leaves a lot to be desired. That being said, story hasn't been mandatory for nearly 3 years at this point, since systems like EX Styles and Mars get unlocked in earlier chapters, and the roadmap promises frequent substantial story updates again, so maybe things will start to look better soon. Unfortunately, the lacking quantity of story had a snowballing effect. Characters don't get enough screen time, the world feels underdeveloped, the enemies feel hollow, etc. Goroa is the perfect example of this. He dies in the prologue of the game, after barely interacting with us, leaving his death feeling rather unimpactful. This was somewhat remedied by optional cutscenes that were patched in which characters talk highly of him, but the better approach would have been to simply have more story content from the get-go. You rarely get a second first impression after all. This obviously doesn't limit itself to Goroa. However, there are several characters that have very few appearances, or feel like they don't serve much of a purpose in the story, which is really disappointing. Story isn't always important in online games, since the focus should arguably lie on gameplay systems and game content, as they have a higher impact on a player's enjoyment of the game. However, the story is the connective tissue that makes dedicated players care about anything they're doing in the game. I'm aware that most casual players will probably not care about story content too much. I'd lie to you if I told you I cared about the story of any of these games on the screen right now, but you don't really see most players talking about games online. You see the vocal minority, those who usually have really strong opinions. If these kinds of players aren't satisfied, then they'll be loud about not enjoying the game. Lately, the devs have been somewhat trying to remedy these issues by giving us interactions with NPCs that are still voiced, but have no cutscenes attached to them, which I suppose is a good compromise. With MMOs, the story always has to go through some sort of compromise in order to reach a certain sweet spot. In PSO2, the early cutscenes looked awful, but there were a lot of them, so they reduced the quantity, but made them look better over the episodes. Later in Episode 5, they added visual novel-styled cutscenes so they can bring back some of the quantity back without having to lower the quality. Similarly, Final Fantasy XIV has an incredible amount of unvoiced cutscenes, which is jarring as hell, but voicing the entire game would be insanely expensive. NGS is going to start the next second story arc in April, and the series director has promised us that new chapters will be released every 4 months, which makes me very hopeful for the game's future. So at the very least, the devs are taking this issue seriously. I just hope this decent pace of the story updates isn't going to stop after 3 or 4 chapters have been released. The setting of NGS also leaves a lot to be desired. H-Alpha feels like a very small planet to be trapped on for presumably a full decade. We explored all of the physical landmarks within just 2 years. Ever since then, the game focused more on instanced content, areas that aren't physically connected to our play area, or are an alternate realm entirely, which is completely antithetical to how the game has been advertised in its early years.
Unleash your burning passion for adventure in a immensely vast world.
In the grand scheme of things, this is better for the game because developing instanced content has always been Phantasy Star Crew's strength, but many people can't help but feel like a large portion of the game was left in disrepair. Granted, this has happened before. In PSO2, free field exploration used to be the bread and butter content for almost the entirety of the first 3 episodes. Your matter boards required you to go there to find cutscene nodes. You could PSE burst in there as well as bump into other parties, and most importantly stumble upon parallel areas that almost guaranteed you'd get a high-level photon art disc, which you also needed to farm for, before they became tradable or even purchasable in the X-Cube shop. This changed around Episode 4. Cutscene nodes were replaced with material gathering nodes, and free fields weren't the go-to quest anymore, with ultimate quests replacing them entirely. Similarly to NGS, you'd only play free fields because the daily quests told you to play them, and outside of that daily reward, there was really not much to do. The fact that this issue has repeated so early makes me concerned about some other future aspects of the game, namely Cradle of Darkness. This quest's final version completely nuked the economy of PSO2, by allowing people to exchange hundreds of weapons and armors for X cubes, which then were exchangeable for grinders, which then were sellable at the NPC trader. Nothing in the game has ever come close to this level of inflation. The best way of earning money before Cradle was to just do weekly quests on multiple characters. That'd generate you 3.6 million Masita per character per week. Ultra Hard Cradle allows you to generate more money than that with a single run of the quest. This left PSO2 in a rather awkward position because instead of building an endgame that asks you to engage with multiple quest types, you have one quest that basically takes care of everything you might need. Some may see that as convenient, but personally it just makes the game feel smaller. They could have made Guardian's Soul easier to build without all this Maseta inflation nonsense. I know many people who said they don't want to play the old game, even though it's still available in a perfectly playable state, because of the wrecked economy. I would not like to see a repeat of this situation in NGS. In general, the economical aspect of PSO2 and NGS is another thing I see some people take issue with. PSO1 didn't have many design elements that are standard for online RPGs these days. So, people played quests either because they were fun or because they were chasing a rare weapon or armor with no price tag attached to it. However, ever since introducing the market board to the series, players can now gauge how much value certain pieces of content have. This means that whichever content is worth playing is purely dictated by supply and demand of the market board. This leads to a lot of quests simply being dead once the demand has been satiated. Personally, I think this is just the reality of online games, and there isn't much that can be done about it. You either roll with it or you don't. I often get criticized, either directly or not, for not being critical enough of the game, often being accused of being a shill since I get free premium and material storage as an official content creator. But the causality is completely wrong with these statements. I'm only in this position because I like the game, not the other way around. I could be kicked out from the program tomorrow, and my stance on the game wouldn't change. I've been here since 2013. Trust me, it's not a phase, Mom. Naturally, I won't have much to complain about, but even if I did, it's not my job to do so. If I feel strongly about a piece of feedback, I will leave it within the corresponding channel and move on with my life. It is true that I'm trying to hype people up to play the game, and am therefore generally focused on the positive aspects. But that is the whole point of being an official content creator. I want this franchise to grow and share my passion with as many players as I can, especially after the frankly inexcusable launch NGS went through. Now, I know that harping on the awful launch is like Doomposting 101, and I'm beyond tired of hearing about it, but it really can't be overstated how much this game fumbled its launch. The way it launched, new class releases were not a substitute for content, and it's genuinely mind-boggling the devs thought this would fly with people. Releasing classes as content updates worked in PSO2 Episode 6, because by the time we were getting more than one Scion class per episode, every class was fully developed, and Scions brought insane gameplay-defining subclasses with them, so even if you weren't going to play any of them, like me, there was a lot to tinker around with. Launch NGS classes were not that. Each subclass only gives like 2 or 3 passive abilities worth talking about, and leveling them is entirely optional, because skill points are no longer tied to levels. This issue hasn't really been fixed until recently with EX styles. Leveling them actually gives skill points, and they have some really cool gameplay defining abilities, so playing around with them is actually fun. And that's ultimately NGS's biggest sin. It just launched without enough content to satisfy its player base. What the devs thought would be sufficient content just wasn't it, and fixing that problem takes time. If you read many first impression blogs from back in the day, people had fun with the game and really enjoyed the revamped elements. They just thought that the lacking content updates and the silence from the developers was deafening. Go back and rewatch the first NGS headline. Compared to the headlines we get these days, there's nothing there. I myself find it extremely difficult to go back to PSO2 these days, because so many improvements to some of my favorite classes and weapons just don't exist. So no, I don't think that NGS as a whole is a disaster as some people would have you believe. I've been playing online games for long enough to know that you don't reach the 5th anniversary by being a disaster. Unfortunately, a lot of people who dislike this game have a tendency to lie about it. Apparently, NGS has been in maintenance mode for 3 years now, purely because they haven't released a new physical region, even though it was player feedback asking the devs to go back to instanced content. Apparently, the game's shutdown is just around the corner for 5 years in a row, justified by incomplete statistics that none of us can parse correctly. Apparently, the game is a blatant cash grab because PSO2 had more story, even though a lot of love and care has been put into designing other aspects of this game. There are so many fantastic screenshot locations and vistas, and many areas feel completely different depending on what time of day you visit them. A blatant cash grab would have been to not work on NGS for 4 years, and just keep PSO2 running with no meaningful updates other than new scratch tickets. This endless cycle of negativity is ultimately this game's biggest hurdle to overcome. Until it does, it won't grow. But how do you overcome it if people perpetuating it don't care? They've written it off years ago and just want the game to end so that the next entry in the franchise can fix everything, even though it likely won't. When it's time to replace planks in the ship of Theseus again, the original ship will be NGS, not PSO2 or PSU or PSO1. If we're really unlucky, the next game might even go the full gacha slop route. In my opinion, that is when the franchise will ultimately die. So no, wishing this game's death isn't supporting the franchise. And you're not acting like a fan, you're acting like a hater. I have a problem with how rampant hating has become on the internet these days in general. YouTube would lead you to believe that nobody likes Legend of Korra, a highly reviewed show that committed the crime of not being a masterpiece like its predecessor. Anything Nintendo gets immediately hated these days. Double points if you're Pokemon. Disney practically has an army of grifters shitting on anything they release. Even Final Fantasy XIV, the game that once grew on memes about how critically acclaimed it is, now has people dedicated to doom posting and shitting on it. There have been countless situations where I see someone state something, and I'd know exactly what YouTube video this opinion came from. This is something the WoW developers have also experienced a lot. I don't like the term influencer, but that is ultimately what content creators are. People get influenced far too easily these days. That being said, I do realize that this video falls under the same category, so if you want to take anything from this, don't blindly parrot my or anyone's opinion. Make up your own mind after researching or experiencing something yourself, and remember that it's fine if you simply don't have an opinion on certain topics. You don't have to comment on everything, especially if that comment is just negativity on a topic you don't really care about. For example, commenting about the state of a game you haven't played in 3 years. It's getting to a point where it is better to not interact with the community of these types of media unless the community self-moderates. Some people will call it an echo chamber, but personally, I don't go into a Pokemon community thinking, God, I hope there's people who hate Pokemon to balance things out. Besides, the people complaining about positive echo chambers usually have no problem being stuck in negative echo chambers themselves. If you think that a YouTuber having a glass half full perspective is problematic, then I don't know what to tell you. Why am I rambling about the community in a video called A Critique of NGS? Well, online games are nothing without their communities. For better or worse, the enthusiasm, or lack thereof, is infectious towards other players, and the situation the game finds itself in is ultimately the responsibility of the developers. Without regular updates to the story, you're starving content creators who make videos about it. Without regular updates to endgame difficulty content, there is far less reason to make gearing guides, or even encourage people to learn how to play the game better. Without any official support from SEGA, all community events are funded from each content creator's pockets. Without Twitch drops, there is no real point in watching live streams of the game, and without high Twitch ratings, the game doesn't have the best visibility. Paying popular streamers to play your game only goes so far. I don't know the details, but it has been a while since we saw a David Plays live stream or the official PSO2 X account trying to engage with the community. SEGA of Japan is unable to support both sides, Japan and global. Equally so, they primarily focus only on the Japanese side. Communication between the devs and players is also very lacking. If the devs are going to rely on official content creators to hype the game up, then it would be nice if at the very least we had some sort of direct communication with them so we can actually fill the void ourselves. But instead, the OCC website is in disrepair. Creators who have completely rebranded and delisted their PSO2 videos are still up on the website with broken YouTube links. Similarly, creators who haven't played the game in ages are also still on the list, and many are missing any kind of image because the process of submitting and updating information is painfully long. There is no excuse for it taking longer than a single week. While editing this video, the OCC website updated. This honestly takes the cake for being the worst update it ever received. My information was updated, and it only took 2 months this time. Trust me, this is really fast compared to how long it usually takes. However, my description is in Japanese. That's a bit inconvenient. I guess I graduated into becoming a JP content creator. Also, Anohana was added to the program, who posts modded screenshots and videos daily. She's almost nude in all of them. I can't show this on YouTube. So that's fun! Before I'll move on, I'd like to add that this is entirely SEGA of Japan's incompetence. From prior situations, I can tell you for a fact that the small support team from SEGA of America that's working on the global version of the game doesn't really have a say in this. All they can do is relay information. So, let's get back to the video. My easily best performing video last year was the EX Style Overview video. It was released days before the headline because JP content creators were invited to play a demo of the styles and make videos about them. I only learned of those videos because the Japanese developer X account posted about them. I don't speak Japanese, so I was only able to understand them thanks to YouTube's new automatic dubbing feature. There shouldn't be this many hoops for me to jump through, for me to make a video that should have been out a day prior, and that's ultimately why for me the rebuilt ship of Theseus is the same ship as before, because nothing has really changed for us Westerners, who played on JP servers before global ones came out. We have an official translation now, but it very frequently features translation errors, which rarely get fixed. We have always been an afterthought, and it's up to us, the community, to make the best of this situation or continue with the apathy. I hope I don't have to say what side of the coin I fall onto.